Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I am Christine Courtney, and I'm so happy to be in the studio today with one of the guys who's definitely my ride or die, Greg Shamie in the house. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Christine.
We're going to talk about one of what's turning out to be so popular, right, Greg? We're getting a ton of requests lately and a lot of work in the area of learning about social style and your versatility in the workplace. And it just seems to be something that is in the collective unconscious that is starting to become more conscious. So we wanted to have a special episode to kind of dig deeper into this subject for those of you who have been learning along with us and want to go a little bit deeper. So if you've learned about social styles, you'll definitely have a chance to learn more. But if you haven't learned, we'll give you kind of a brief overview of it. So you ready?
Ready spaghetti.
Okay, here we go. So just to give all of our analytical people out there some basis that this is just not made up phony baloney, that this is based in research, I wanted to give them just a brief history of where this social styles assessment comes from. Okay, so even though it's also, while it's called social style, it is really talking about how you are at work. It means social because it's coming from the idea of social intelligence. So Greg, I know you know about social intelligence. So you want to just give them a brief overview of what social intelligence is real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all heard the term emotional intelligence and how important it is in the workplace. People describe it as the most important soft skill, and I would argue that it is not soft. It is essential. And, the emotional intelligence piece is about understanding my own emotions and how to navigate them and express them in a healthy way and how to navigate other people's emotions. And that's where the social piece comes in, is the interaction piece with other humans in the workplace and beyond. And how do I navigate that in effective ways when you're including all the different elements that come up when you're dealing with fellow humans?
Yeah. And what I love about this is that some people do this very naturally and don't even realize why they're good at it. And what this does, it starts to break down human behavior into categories. So if you're not good at it, you can learn to get good at it. It really breaks down stuff that we don't talk about. Like it's all what people perceive as like it's a gut instinct, but it actually can be broken down. So if you need to get better at interpersonal effectiveness, this is for you. If you're already good at it, you are going to love it because your neurons in your brain are already primed to take on even more information in this area and get great at it. So really, when we're talking about it, like Greg said, we're talking about interpersonal effectiveness. That's the extent to which a person interacts productively with others, earns their respect and support, and gains their trust.
And the key to this is that we're all different. And that's why the assessment is interesting, because the social styles assessment, because it puts you into one of the quadrants, which we're going to talk about. And then you get to see kind of how you are in relation to how you work with others and how that impacts people that are similar to you and different than you and how it impacts those interactions.
Right. And we're going to end today with some tips for each style that Greg's going to give you. But in most industries, like your employee's ability to work productively with others sets you apart as whether you're going to succeed or fail. So this is a great one to help. It helps not only with how employees get along, but it really helps with sales. Salespeople love this because it allows you to read the room very quickly, so to speak, read the person, adapt your style a little bit for them when it's need be. Also with vendors, with your spouses, with kids, any of this we're going to touch upon. But just to give you a brief history, brief history goes back to Socrates. So really, whenever we're talking about these types of surveys, they all go back to Socrates, right? Because really what he was looking at, he was even realizing way back then that people were either purpose driven or they were relationship driven. And you will notice that whether you're talking about DISC or whether you're talking about social styles or whether you're talking about working genius, whatever the assessment is that you're working on, generally those two categories come into play. And that goes as far as, it probably goes back before Socrates, but that's when we have like notice of it. And then a long time went until about 1945 at Ohio State, and the Department of Navy did a huge study, and they started looking at like what makes the most effective leaders, right? And when they started looking at that, lo and behold, they came up with, they had like 150 different things. And what they started to see when they looked at it was that it came into these two quadrants, relationship oriented leader or a task or purpose driven leader. And what they started to realize that both are good. It just depends on the situation. And then in the late 1950s, David Merrill took all of that information and learning and created what is known now as the social style and versatility scale, and really looking at like not only a self-assessment piece, but when you do social styles, you can also get your team and the people you work with to do an assessment of you. It's a little more costly, but that is one thing you can do so that you can compare how others see you to how you see yourself. And so David Merrill added that. And then also this idea of the higher versatility scale you had, the better you were at adapting to other people's styles. All right. So that's the basic history of where this came from. And now we're going to talk about what are these 4 styles. So you take the assessment and then you get this huge report and it comes to you and it's a little overwhelming. And then hopefully Greg or I or somebody on our team comes out and does a session with your team that's super fun and gets everybody interacting and seeing how this works, not just on paper. We take it from theoretical to the actual like engagement of reality. And we go into these 4 quadrants. And as a reminder, if you haven't done it, these are the 4 quadrants. Greg's going to tell us about them. So Greg, why don't you start with whichever one you want first? Which one do you want to start with?
Oh, well, I always like to start with the upper right quadrant, which is the driver. So the 4 quadrants are upper right driver, bottom right expressive, bottom left amiable, and upper left analytical. So those are our 4 quadrants. I don't know if you want to talk about the axes and how they break down, how how they put you into these different buckets.
Good idea. So Greg, what are the 2 axes that make these 4 quadrants?
Okay, so on the x-axis, you have assertiveness scale. And so it basically breaks it down to, on the left side of the scale is ask assertive. And then as you move across the x-axis to the other side, it's tell assertive. So a dimension of behavior that measures the degree to which others perceive a person as tending to ask or tell in interactions with others. That's really what they're measuring on that x-axis. And then on the y-axis, it's responsiveness, dimension of behavior that measures the degree to which others perceive a person as tending to control or display his or her feelings and emotions when interacting. So this to me is fascinating. More controlling, obviously, up at the top of the y-axis, and then more emoting down at the bottom of the y-axis. And this is how we get our 4 quadrants. The driving style is very tell assertive and more controlled. The expressive style down in the bottom right quadrant is tell assertive, more than ask assertive, tell assertive, and more emoting. So I'm an expressive. You can see by the way my eyes and my facial expressions, start to come to life when I'm speaking. I'm very more emoting. The amiable style is more ask assertive and also bottom left quadrant, more emoting. And then you have the analytical style, which is ask assertive and more controlled.
Perfect. And what's really fun about that is if you go back to Socrates' time, on the top of those top 2 quadrants are the more task-oriented, purpose-driven folks, and the people on the bottom quadrant are more relationship-oriented leaders. So you can even go back to Socrates' time when you start looking at that. All right. So now let's go into what those 4 quadrants mean. So let's start with the driving style, because that tends to be the one that people can identify very quickly. So Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about the driving style?
I'm thinking of some of my colleagues who are drivers, and they're a little more formal. They're very independent, very practical. They like to take the reins. So when we're doing some different activities with the group, you can tell immediately who the drivers are because they're stepping forward. They're step forward folks. They're bottom line people. They love results, very focused, and they like to get things done. What am I missing, Christine?
They're quick. So usually if we're doing an activity, the drivers are done in half the time.
Yes, this is absolutely true.
They know this is the result. We're not going to bother with small talk. We're going to just get to the result. Forget about like getting to know each other, that kind of thing. All right. So that's the driver style in a nutshell. So let's stay on the top of the quadrants. Let's go over to the analytical style. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this type of person?
Okay. So this is, again, I'm thinking of some of my colleagues who are analytical. They're a little more serious. They're a little more precise. They love to be very logical, and they love data. If you hand them some kind of data and research, that's their love language. They have a difficult time, Christine, coming to make decisions, right? I guess you could describe that as indecisive, but they always want to get more data and more information, and that's why they have a difficult time making decisions.
Yes, I would say that that's true. So if we go down to the bottom, on the bottom left, we have the amiable style. So tell us about the amiable style.
I love amiables. They're very warm, supportive, dependable, very open, very malleable, and they are always focused on and worried and concerned about every single person. So there's a big social awareness around happiness or connectedness or inclusiveness with everybody involved in the equation.
Absolutely true. We did this yesterday with a big group. And what I loved is that when I see the amiable group get together, they all sit down immediately in a circle. They face each other. They listen. Everybody's voice is heard. There's a lot of nodding and smiling, right? They're a really nice group. And whatever they talk about, Greg's right. They tend to like add on ideas rather than edit or cut anything. So sometimes what they come out with can be a little long and like lose its theme or lose its direction, which can drive those drivers crazy because they have no problem cutting people's ideas. But the amiables are super nice. They're always facing each other. When they're presenting, they're always enthusiastic about each other and very supportive. All right, let's go to the expressive style. Last but not least, they're going to hate that we left them for last, but they're in the bottom right-hand corner.
Well, I don't hate it because, great things come last, like me, expressive. So I would describe expressives as they love to use inspirational phrases. I mean, I heard folks expressives yesterday in my workshop working with some drivers, and the driver was telling them idea after making it actionable and all these like things that the driver does. And I heard the expressive person say that you have such great ideas. And I was like, expressive? Oh my God, we're forceful, we're animated, we're adventurous, we're impulsive, full of energy. We love stories. What else? Big picture. We love themes. If you bring structure to an expressive, that really can make them very effective because they're pretty good at just kind of going off the cuff.
Very good. Matter of fact, a group that I had yesterday of expressives finished quickly like the drivers. They tend to be action oriented like drivers because they're both on that right side of the scale, but they also just trust if they're going to have to present, they don't practice their presentation because they're so good at it and they trust that they're going to be good in an improvisational way. Unlike the analyticals, they really practice what they're going to say. They make sure everybody knows they have their bullet points together. Sometimes they'll even have a rehearsal, whereas you'll rarely see that with the expressives.
It's amazing. I think it's really fascinating how it plays out every time we do this session. For folks, you see so clearly how each of these people in these categories express themselves.
Yeah, another thing that tends to happen is that we ask people to come back with one person to present the ideas of the group, and everybody presents and the expressives go, and then what happens is that they don't pick one person. Everybody talks some point. Just cracks me up. It almost happens every time. So anyway, those are the 4 styles. You can take a deeper dive online by looking up a lot of this stuff. It's really fascinating, but we're going to tell you a couple things that we rarely get to in the workshops just because of time, but it can be really helpful. And some of these stuff, Greg just gave you a great broad overview. And, but I want to get to a couple of juicy things, right? Which is one is the growth action for each one. And one is what they call in social styles, the backup behavior. So the growth action is really like, where is the edge? Where is the part where this style works for you most of your life? It is your preferred behavior of the way you are in work or a lot of times in home. But it's also sometimes can tip over in certain areas into a place where you need to step back and be more versatile with others. And so each one has what we call a growth action. So for drivers, the growth action, remember the need for them is results. They're very results driven. They want to always get results. If you want to make sure that you have a group together to achieve something, and it may be a really difficult goal, you want a driver on that team because they're going to make sure they're keeping the results at the forefront of their mind. Right. The growth action, their orientation then is towards action. They don't want to have a lot of discussion about it. There's a need for control and they want to move quickly. So their orientation is to action. Their growth action that they need to get better at sometimes. Can you guess what it is?
Yes,
everybody?
I can guess what it is. It's the need to listen to others because they're just moving forward so fast that they forget that there's so much power in listening to others and what others bring to the equation. And so, I mean, you can even get more specific, Christine, and talk about listening to others' feelings.
Yes. They don't like feelings. That
They don't
slows
like
things down.
feelings. They don't like feelings. It's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, of course they do. And you guys who are drivers out there, you'll say, what? I have very good yes. But when it comes to the results will always outweigh other people's feelings unless you're very careful. So of course you can listen, but it just has to be something that is absolutely a forefront of your mind of like, okay, I'm going into this meeting. I'm going to make sure that I listen or that I hold back from talking sometimes, or I feel the tension in my body of wanting to control this moment or of wanting to move quickly. And I'm going to breathe through that tension and know that listening to others' feelings right now is going to help me in the long run. All right. So that's the driving style. The analytical style, Greg, they have a need. So they want results too. Everybody wants results at work. But however, their need more than results is to be correct. They want to be right. They want to have the right answer. They want to make sure they're doing the right thing for the organization. So therefore, they are really oriented towards thinking about things, processing it, wondering, have I weighed the pros and cons? How can I make sure that I'm correct?
Very academic, very academic.
Very academic, love to do a lot of research. If they're going on vacation, check that they have researched with everybody. Sometimes they have Chat GPT do their vacation plans. Like they are very much researchers. And their growth action, right, because of this is to declare.
That's right.
Sometimes make decisions based on what information they have at the time.
And that's the hardest thing for them because they want to keep getting more and more information and doing more research. So that's why the indecisive is there. So their growth action is to actually see what they have, make decisions, and move things forward.
Yeah, the example that I always use is that I had a controller, and I mean, it's a perfect name for an analytical controller, right? It's a perfect title. You want your controller to be correct. You want them to be thinking, but sometimes I'd be like, we need to know, are we going to make it? Like, well, give me a back of the envelope calculation. And there could be nothing more scary for an analytical than to give a back of the envelope calculation. And he would actually say to me, Christine, stop pop quizzing me. And I'd be like, we're 3/4 of the way through the year. I don't think this is a pop quiz. But to him, he needed that in writing. He needed to know. He needed to have time. And I was putting too much pressure. So sometimes you have to know as an analytical that it is important to declare, depending on who you're working with. All right. So let's go through. Why don't you go through the growth actions and the needs and stuff for amiables, Greg?
Okay. So our amiables, they want security. They want personal security. They want to feel safe. They want everyone to feel safe, right? That's their need. Their orientation is definitely not thinking. It's relationships. Are you okay? What do you need? How's it going? How's this working for you? How can we make this better for you, right? Relationships. Their growth action is to initiate without others' buy-in. Very hard for amiables to initiate and move things forward without knowing everyone is on board.
Yeah. So a lot of times when an amiable comes to you with an idea, they'll mention the word people 50 times in the conversation, and they will have checked not on ChatGPT or not in chart data, but they will have checked and talked to everybody in your organization to say, well, if we're having our holiday party, we should have 3 different types of food, or we should have 3 different ways to get there, or we should have, and sometimes you have to be like, just choose one. And that stress comes up in them of like, oh my God, I'm not taking into account everybody's feelings.
So moving things forward without everyone's buy-in, I think is very difficult for them, but that's their growth action.
Yes. All right. So expressives.
Okay, here we go. Our need is definitely approval. We love to make sure we're doing okay. We need to be validated, personal approval. That's our need. Orientation is spontaneity. That's definitely where we were saying we go as expressives, where we love to live on the edge. And then our growth action is to check, getting supporting details and ensure others are appropriately involved. So for me, that's structure, right? The growth action is structure, really bringing that to the spontaneity question, because if you combine those two, then suddenly you become extremely effective.
Yeah, I'm going to blow your mind here with this one too, because I've been reading up a lot on social styles lately, and I too am an expressive. And I was reading this idea of this growth action as to check. And that's definitely true. I need to check my gut feeling. I'm very confident, right, with my gut feelings. And so sometimes I need to check that. But the other thing I read, Greg, are you ready for this? We also have to check our behavior. And this one was like an ouchie for me, because I know this feeling sometimes where I can come in big Like I can come in big somewhere that doesn't always require that type of energy. And I can kind of take over a room if I'm not careful. Sometimes that's needed. But I thought, oh, I know that feeling of sometimes I've even had people, and this is so shameful, but I've even had people put their hands over their ears like I'm too loud. And it hurts me. Like I feel that like as a kid being told that sometimes I was just a little too much. And so when I have that, I have to remember sometimes I have to take a breath before I start my wonderful spontaneous thing to kind of just check my behavior. Is my energy, is my behavior in line with what is needed in this moment?
Well, that makes complete sense and very relevant for me too. I mean, and I think that's where our social intelligence, our emotional intelligence, our reading the room, our seeing what the needs are, right? Checking with what's needed by others is going to really help us put ourselves where we need to be in that space.
Yeah. The other thing that we don't get to talk about a lot is what they call in social style backup behavior. And so you guys probably haven't heard that term, even if you've taken one of our workshops, but I think it's really valuable. And what they mean by backup behavior, as best as I can define it for myself, is defensiveness. So what happens to you in your preference of behavior style in the workplace when you're hit with crisis, when you're under stress? What is maybe not the greatest way that you respond, right? Maybe what's the kind of negative way that what the people in your office would say, oh, that's toxic or whatever, right? So backup behavior is like, what's your defensiveness that kicks in under stress if you're not careful? And so the driving style, are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Is they become autocratic. So they really shut down listening, feeling, and they just want to control because that's where the defense kicks in. I've always been successful if I've been able to control and get results, then I will be good. And so my backup behavior is I'm going to become very autocratic and tell everybody what to do because then I'll know that this will get done. So that's what happens kind of under stress.
I had a driver yesterday who says, so basically you're saying we're dictators?
Yeah, sometimes.
And I was like, well, that depends on the situation and how, what behaviors you decide you're going to be using. So I love that. So they become autocratic. That's when you overdo that behavior that makes you in that quadrant, whatever quadrant it is. When you're overdoing it, that's what happens.
Yeah. And so that's where all the emotional intelligence work of breathing and taking a walk around the block and meditating, all those things come in handy now to get you out of that backup behavior into the strength of your style rather than the negative part of it that can come up. Okay. So expressives. Are you ready for this?
Yeah. Yes.
Expressives under a defensive mode tend to attack. And this was interesting to me to read about because I was defensive at first when reading this. And then I was like, oh yeah, like we tend to be good with our words. And so those words can also lash out with a lot of energy and can go on the attack. And sometimes, depending on where you are in the quadrants, right? You might be closer to driving or you might be closer to amiable, but still in the expressive. That attack can look different. So that attack can look passive aggressive. It could be that you're complaining to your neighbor about this person or you're being very harsh. And I know for myself, sometimes in my executive team meetings where maybe I feel very comfortable, but if we have a lot of stress, in the past, I'm not proud of it, but sometimes my response has been to lash out at someone who's not in the room, but who's somebody that I'm upset with or their behavior is upsetting. And I'm actually not the greatest of leaders in that moment because I'm talking about them in quite a caustic way. And if I could go back, and inevitably when I'm finished, I always feel guilty. And luckily I always have somebody who's amiable. It's always someone who's closer to the amiable style that pulls me back and goes, okay, Christine, but let's think about our people are important. And, so they kind of pull me back from it if you have a good relationship with them. But that takes a lot of trust and a lot of courage on that amiable's part, right? So anyway, I just want to own that and say that while my backup behavior can be to attack and I'm working on it, but that it definitely would surprise people, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, and it's good to know that. Again, this whole session is all about expanding my awareness, right? Expanding my self-awareness and how I interact with others. And so if I know that when I'm in high anxiety situations that my spontaneity and my ability to express energy and emote is going to attack, then that's really important, because then I can bring in some, things that are going to work to help me calm down, step back, relax, like you were saying, really
The
intervene.
person who generally helps you see this quickly is your spouse or your child or your friend or your teenager, because they definitely will call me out on it, right? Because they don't work for me. So they'll definitely tell me. All right. So amiables. So their backup behavior for amiables. Some of you probably can guess it. Do you have any guesses, Greg? I'll put you on the spot.
Well, just thinking here, if their growth action is to initiate on their own, if their need is personal security, right? So then if you expand that, what does it become? It becomes, what's that? Hyper vigilance.
Okay. It could be that. It also could be that they acquiesce. They go along to get along because they're afraid of conflict. It's easier for them to just nod their heads. And this is what you see happen, nod their heads, and they go dark behind the eyes, and they just go, okay, because they don't want that conflict. Right. And so not only do they not initiate, now they're not even there. Right. They're partially gone. They just acquiesce and go, okay, whatever you want, because I don't want this conflict. And we see this all the time in the workplace. Right. And what happens is productivity goes in the toilet because you're working with half a person.
Yeah. So there's a complete shutdown.
Complete shutdown. Not even a shutdown, but like they're there and they're working because they're never going to be impolite, or they're going to do their work, but they're just going to acquiesce. Acquiesce is what happens. And so part of it is getting their strength to kind of say, no, I believe this, and I'm going to risk having some conflict with you. All right. And then the last one, analytical, is a little bit similar, but because their growth action that Greg talked about so well is to be, to declare what they're thinking, to put a line in the sand and say, yes, this or that, not like I need more time. So when they're under pressure and they're under stress, they tend to withdraw. So rather than acquiesce and just say, okay, I'll go along to get along, they withdraw, which means you can't find them. They're deep in their computers researching away. They're not coming to think, they're just half there as well. They're not nodding to you and saying, okay. They're just withdrawing. You can't find them. They're late on tasks. They're late on things. They just withdraw. And you're like, hey, are you with us? Like, what's going on? Mm-hmm. And so that's really important, especially if you don't have regular one-on-one meetings where you can draw that out of them. If you're just expecting to find these people every day, they're going to withdraw, and you're going to be like, why haven't I talked to so-and-so in so long? And it's because they're under stress and they're under the piles of paper and work that's on their desk, and they're trying to make themselves feel better by kind of just avoiding and, going away from it all.
I love those backup behaviors. I think they're really important, actually, and very eye-opening for each person who's put into one of these categories. I think they would definitely relate to it. I know I am with the expressive one.
Okay.
For sure.
So give us, as we close out today, I'm going to ask you to give 3 of your favorite tips for working with each style. And then I'm going to give you guys what their general appearance or workplace looks like, only because these are generalizations, right? All these are generalizations, and everyone is on a continuum here, right? You're not just one of these 4 things all the time, but you generally have a pattern of behavior that falls in here. And it generally comes with also appearance and workplace, your desk area. And so I'm going to give a couple of those, because if you're trying to pick out someone's style, it's important to increase your versatility by working with them in ways that help them relax and reduce stress. But also you want to know, like, how do I find this out about a person, especially if I'm just seeing them for the first time? These hints can be given to you by also the way how they choose to appear. Okay. So go ahead, Greg. What are 3 favorite tips of the driving style to work with them?
Driving. Okay. 1 second. Let me think about my drivers for a second here. I think what I need to do first with them is respect their time, because I know they're very focused, right? And so, and they want results. So respecting their time, stick to the facts. I'm not going to really tell stories with them. And I think they really appreciate following up on what you say you're going to do.
Yes.
So respecting their time, sticking to the facts, and following up on my promises of what I said I would do.
So if you go in to see a driver, they are generally going to be dressed very functionally. They're going to dress very bold, and they're going to dress with something that displays authority. So you're going to see them probably dress one step above what the normal dress code is, if there's a choice. But they're definitely going to, whatever it is that's going to resonate with authority, whether that's a suit and tie, whether that's heels, whatever that means in your business. And they generally probably wouldn't wear a top like this, for instance, that has a lot of like pattern. It would be black and white or something that's very kind of strong and bold and creates that image. Additionally, at the workplace, if you scanned their workplace, you could see accomplishments displayed. They're going to have, their diplomas up. They're going to have stacks of paper, but they're going to be very organized. They have multiple projects. They tend to be sometimes status conscious. They'll of course have pictures. Everybody has pictures up, but very clean lines, very bold, very crisp. The way they take notes, however it is, they're very, it's also about time and having a lot of clarity.
Another tactic I use with drivers is letting them drive. And so obviously I want to show my competence because they appreciate that because again, they're result oriented and they're action oriented, but letting them drive is actually a strategy I use if I know someone's a driver. I let them drive and I make them feel good about that as an expressive working with a driver.
Yeah. And they do come through. They come through on results. So It's not a bad idea. All right. Tell us about some tips for your top 3 tips, maybe for working with the expressive style.
That's me.
Yeah.
Oh, so what do you want to do with me is you want to, there's so many things, but you want to have fun with me. You want to I like to enjoy the journey. So you laughing with me, listening to me, expanding our perspectives. I love that, thinking big picture. If you want to validate something I'm bringing, that definitely, makes me feel good and lightens me up. And just that connectivity piece. If you're connecting with me, then I'm being juiced by you.
Yeah, love it. And if generally appearance, they tend to be more attention grabbing in their appearance. They tend to be more colorful in what they're wearing. It could be their shoes. It could be something fun. It could be whatever. They're not afraid to grab attention. And the same thing, their workplace can be very colorful, decorative, lots of memorabilia around. They love stories. So they love for someone to say, what's that about? And tell a story about it. Group photos, lots of group photos. They tend to vacation with lots of people, and it also could be disorganized. There's a general chance that it's disorganized. All right. So let's go to amiable style. What's a couple of tips for working with amiable style?
Well, you said it really well, I think, in their backup behavior. You want to, obviously, if there's any kind of conflict, you want to approach it carefully. I think that is really important for amiables. Not that you don't want to approach conflict, because dealing with conflict is essential for being able to, develop strong dynamic teams. But amiables are super sensitive to that. So I want to be aware of that. I want to get to know them. I want to consider their perspectives. I want to draw out their opinions. If I have an issue, handle it privately. They don't want it to be public, and courtesy is something that amiables love.
Yeah. Make sure I've learned this the hard way. Make sure your emails don't just get right to the point. You've got to say, hey, how are you doing? How was your weekend? They do not like an email that it doesn't have a salutation. I'll tell you that from personal experience. The other thing is their general appearance is casual, comfortable, and somewhat conforming. Like it's not going to stand out terribly generally, but they're definitely usually casual and comfortable in what they're wearing. Their workplace is a very serene environment usually. A lot of times you'll see plants in these people's spaces, lots of personal belongings that are there. Lots of could be, little stuffed animals. It could be pictures of their family, lots of family pictures, and it generally tends to be orderly. All right. And then last but not least, the analytical style. What are some tips for working with the analytical style?
Well, I think definitely taking my time because I like to go, with lots of energy. So like grounding myself, really focusing on communicating clearly and being precise in my communications. Don't pressure them for answers, respect their processes, and ask directly for their feedback. I think that's something that analyticals actually appreciate and like. And
maybe not, but they need it.
they need it. But it's if you're going to do it, I think it's a good thing to ask directly to them. I think they would if they feel safe, and give them the space to sort of answer that however they want. They like the space piece.
And time.
Time. Yeah. Space and time.
Yeah. And their general appearance, as you can probably imagine, is more formal, more traditional, right? Well groomed. These people are very well groomed. They don't miss a haircut. They follow the dress code. Their office is going to be very functional and practical. They're going to have charts up. They're going to have, things taped up that they have to reference pretty often. Sometimes they can have artwork up that makes people think or engage in a different way. They can also, it's going to somewhat appear messy, but they can always find everything. Like they're the people that have millions of piles, but you ask them for something and they know exactly where it is. So those are just some of the tips. And there's so many more things we could get into, but maybe another time, because we can get into listening styles and natural behavior of tasks and gestures, all these things. But I think you start to get a deeper understanding of where this comes from and how you can really increase your versatility and interpersonal skills by studying this.
I love it, Christine. It's so interesting to me, even having done it yesterday with a team. I'm always learning and fascinated by how people respond to this, including myself. And I just love it.
Yeah. What's something that you've learned about yourself that you think you're incorporating? Now I'm putting you on the spot for sure.
Well, no, for sure. I mean, just like from the social styles breakdown, the expressive piece, continually being fascinated with how I express myself. Actually, you really hit me with that backup behavior piece, because I can see it now. Like I do go into that attack mode if I'm in a high anxiety situation, high intense situation. And I really have to have, tools and approaches to help me ground myself, because the energy is just very high.
Very high. So if you want to get better at those things, listen to our episodes on emotional intelligence, because those skills you need for everything, but especially when you're talking about working with social intelligence. Greg, I love talking to you. It's fun. I'm glad that we're doing lots of this work lately. It's so interesting and so full of juicy tidbits for all of us. Thanks so much for coming on today. Thanks you guys for listening, and hope to have you join us again.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks everybody for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.